Good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started in just a minute here. Great. Well, good morning. My name is Kirsty Seeloff, and I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance and Traverse Connect. Welcome to the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance's webinar on the MDHHS Epidemic Order and MIOSHA Emergency Rules with our special guest, Sean Egan, Michigan COVID-19 Workplace Director within the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. The Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance is a coalition of 16 chambers and economic development organizations and over 7,000 member businesses from all across Northern Michigan. We advocate for rule-centric business policy primarily at the state level. As part of our COVID-19 engagement and support, we have coordinated a webinar to help your business understand current state COVID requirements. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation, so please go ahead and use the Q&A box to submit a question. You don't have to wait until the end of the presentation to submit a question. You can start doing that right now already, and we'll get to as many as we can. Before I get started, I'd like to take a moment to share a little bit of information about our guest, Sean Egan, Michigan COVID-19 Workplace Director within the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. Sean is a lifelong West Side Michigander, served in the Navy, and afterwards started an apprenticeship and became a journeyman electrician through the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. He maintains his membership in his union and state license as a journeyman to this day. In 2007, he was elected by the members as the head of the local union representing construction, electricians, manufacturing, broadcasting, and electrical and motor service industries. His duties included managing the nonprofit operations and representational activities for members. In 2010, he was named as one of the 40 under 40 by the Grand Rapids Business Journal. Sean holds a Bachelor of Business Administration with a concentration in finance from Davenport University and a Juris Doctor from Thomas M. Cooley Law School he earned by going to classes at night and on weekends while continuing to work and raise his 3 children with his wife. So Sean, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me, Kirsty. I really appreciate it. I think this is the second time I've been with you all, and I really do enjoy the opportunity to get around the state. One of the silver linings of COVID is that we're all quite familiar with Zoom and everything now, so we're having these meetings all over the state very, very quickly. And we're going to talk for quite a while today and then take a lot of questions the best that we can. We're going to focus in on a lot of the workplace safety rules that you are all navigating and sorting out as you continue to move forward as we fight to contain COVID together. I can try to take some questions on the DHHS information that came out yesterday, but certainly they have to interpret their stuff, so we'll do our best, but we appreciate trying to take those questions. There's a lot going on with COVID. As you all know, we've seen it explode across our state, and I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Normally, I don't like to talk through slides too much, but we're going to have to do that because there's a lot of information to cover. Just like all of you, no question that the governor and all of us in the state are working hard to try to contain COVID in our workplaces. And I know that part of the reason for this webinar was that last week we announced a state emphasis program regarding office environments and others. We are working on other state emphasis programs for other industries as well. And you'll understand why as we work through this presentation this morning. I can tell you from the start of this, though, that the governor's goal, my goal, our Department of Labor's goal is really to help businesses get open and stay open. That's one of the things we talked about last time I was with you all, and certainly something you're going to hear today. And as we're battling COVID, it's becoming hard, as you saw yesterday from DHHS, to really keep these numbers in a place that we can be safe, we can be open, and we can engage in some sort of life. It's not going to be normal for some time, and I think we have to get used to that. There is some bright spot out there as we're hearing more about these viruses that are vaccines that are being developed, and they're getting close, right? We're seeing Dr. Fauci and others talk about how good they seem to be, how the testing is going, how they seem to be working, and then what kind of timeline. But we have more months of this ahead, at least more months of this ahead. So we really have to settle in. We're in this for the long haul. We have to fight it together, and it's on all of us to take some responsibility for those pieces that we can control to move forward fighting COVID. So as you know, there's a lot of noise around COVID. I just mentioned the vaccines getting a lot of news right now. We're very, very hopeful, and that's going to move us in a positive direction as we try to contain and fight COVID. But a few of the things that from the very beginning have remained the same throughout, and that's the need for social distancing, wearing face coverings when we can't do that or we're in crowded environments, and practicing good hygiene. Now, all of those things work together to help mitigate the spread. And some of the things we do know is that about 40% of the spread of this virus is coming from those that are asymptomatic. That means that they're never going to get a symptom. They're never going to feel sick. So they're just out and about doing normal things, going about their day or going about their business. And that's why those face coverings are just so critical, because they're spreading the virus, but they don't know they have it. You know, another significant spread comes from those that are pre-symptomatic, meaning they're carrying it, they're spreading it, but they don't know it yet. They will develop symptoms and illnesses, and we will catch that down the road. But right now, they are out there able to spread that. And the virus continues to spread through large respiratory droplets and aerosols we create when we talk, sing, cough, sneeze, you name it. And those things travel. Those face coverings we use are about 70% effective of containing the virus. And that what that does is it really pulls that virus right back to our faces, whether it's a large respiratory droplet or an aerosol. And if we're both wearing those, as you can see from this risk of transmission, it really cuts down on the probability that it's going to spread from me to you or you to me. Now, when we had the stay home, stay safe order in the spring, that was by far the strongest piece that we could do to try to bring those numbers down, because it's the ultimate isolation. We're staying away from each other. We're not exposing each other through work or other places, but we can keep that low just by wearing those face coverings when we're in common areas, in shared spaces. We're going to be running into each other. So just things that we absolutely need to do to make sure that we are continuing to move forward. So in Michigan, we are continuing to have a high number of workplace outbreaks. Now, understand that it's not the walls in the building that have COVID, it's us. So any place that we're congregating is bad. So it doesn't matter if it's your backyard barbecue or birthday party, or you're in the workplace. As we've seen with COVID, and as you know, when we come together, we're spreading this virus, and that's because of that asymptomatic. It's because our positivity rate is so high. It's because of a lot of things. So the critical thing that we have to keep in mind when we're working through these rules and the DHHS order are those pieces that I mentioned to you: distance, mask, hygiene, distance, mask, hygiene. All of these concepts are built around those three pieces, including the DHHS orders that you saw yesterday, to try to keep us away from each other because our positivity rate is so high. And we've been continuing to track outbreaks all summer. Offices and other environments, offices in particular, have been relatively high compared to other industries all summer, and they're continuing to do that. So DHHS, as of 11/5, this will get updated today, was tracking about 150 ongoing workplace outbreaks. And when I look at those numbers, I take out schools, nursing homes, colleges, childcare, jails, prisons, only because that's going to include a lot of non-employees. So I'm trying to focus in on those areas just to highlight for you where it's more likely that these are employees getting the virus, not other people like students, prisoners, you know, those types of folks. Now, certainly there are employees in those types of locations that are getting this virus. We just don't have the data to pull them all out. But you can see just from what I'm using that we have a significant number of outbreaks in workplaces. They're tracking about 150, 40 of those are in manufacturing and construction, 21 are in offices. And just in the week prior to the 5th, which I forgot to change my date there, I apologize, there were 91 new outbreaks in workplaces, 18 of those in office settings, 26 in manufacturing. And just for reference, there were about 12 in social gatherings reported for that week. So that just goes to show you that that congregation piece, wherever we're getting together, provides a chance for us to spread COVID. So we really have to be very, very diligent about what we're doing in our workplaces. And as you know, these numbers are getting updated as well, but our case numbers are through the roof. We're in the E category, meaning we're not containing the virus. Our positivity rate is actually over 13% now. In northern Michigan, it's 10%. Depending on which county you pick, it's actually higher. Those cases per million are in the E category as well. And you're really seeing a big change in Northern Michigan from sort of that phase 5 flow that everybody was having into the fall to what was feared about winter and fall is just enormous spread in our communities that we're failing to contain. There's a lot of reasons for that, but we're going to cover just a few of those mitigation strategies that you can use to try to battle back against COVID. So first things first, as you know, during the summer, the governor was issuing executive orders. You were getting in compliance with those executive orders and understanding them. There were some that were specific to workplace rules that you were in line with, and MIOSHA and our guidance was working from. We were also working from CDC and other guidance, including federal OSHA, to really reinforce these concepts. As you know, the Michigan Supreme Court held that the governor didn't have the authority to use those executive orders after April 30th. So we've seen a transition. So within MIOSHA, they've issued emergency rules covering workplace safety and health, which they do have authority to do for sure, as you all know. And you're going to see a lot of consistency there from what you were doing with the executive orders into those workplace rules. And DHHS is focusing more on those more, what I would call flexible components. So when we do emergency rules for MIOSHA, we're looking at those being in place for at least 6 months. We don't want to change them too much. So we really looked at those things we thought would need to be static, that aren't going to change a lot with COVID based on what we know right now. And DHHS is tackling those things that you are seeing now, where they need to change and modify, open some things, close some things, change some capacity limits, those types of things. So you're going to see that moving forward. And the way that you can navigate this, and I know it's a lot to focus in on and it's a lot to figure out, is to, when I talk through what you need to do for our rules, get that all in place as these are the things that are going to be here that I need to be doing. And then line up those DHHS pieces, because those will be more of the moving parts that you'll want to navigate. And certainly when you look at the DHHS order, it doesn't necessarily apply the same to every industry, where the MIOSHA rules are going to apply the same to every industry. And then we do have some industry specific rules that you'll need to apply for your particular industry. Face coverings comes up a lot in questions, so I'll just touch on this briefly, but the DHHS order is going to require face coverings pretty much everywhere. In the MIOSHA rules, because these are more static, in workplaces, depending on if you're open to the public or not, you're going to need to provide those face coverings. Non-medical grade face coverings can be those cloth masks, and that employees must wear those when they cannot maintain that 6 feet of separation. Remember those large respiratory droplets. And if they're getting closer than that, you want to consider face shields too, because as I mentioned, those non-medical grade surgical masks, cloth face coverings, about 70% effective. So if we're getting too close together, it is going to increase the probability that we can spread the virus to each other. So we really need to pull that back and consider additional protections if you have employees that must work side by side, really close together. And then in shared spaces. So shared spaces are in-person meetings, hallways, restrooms, cafeterias, you name it, where there are a lot of people coming in. Cubicles are fine if they have those higher walls. Now, if you have those low wall cubicles, those employees, if they're within 6 feet of others, are going to be wearing those face coverings. If you have the high cubicle walls, they can take those off in there, but they just, as long as there's one employee inside that cubicle, and then as soon as they leave, of course, they need to put that face covering back on. And then we do have some industry-specific requirements in several industries where customers and employees will always need to be wearing masks. And those are retail. Those are things that you're used to now. As I mentioned, the DHHS order really requires folks to be wearing face coverings pretty much anywhere you can go where you're going to come together and not be able to maintain that social distance. So last Thursday, I believe it was, we launched a state emphasis program from MIOSHA. And what that means is this is a proactive enforcement strategy. These are investigators. I'm going to talk about our consultation tools that you can use in just a few minutes, but these are investigators going out, randomly selecting certain types of environments. We're focused in on offices for this particular emphasis program because we've continued to see a large amount of outbreaks in those locations. It's randomly selected and they're just going to stop in. They will make themselves known. It's not undercover or anything like that, not just going to wander around. They will make themselves known and they will conduct an inspection on the spot. And they're going to look for some things. And in our rules, some of those things that you must have a preparedness and response plan. More than likely, all of you do. If you do not, we have a template for low and medium risk workplaces, which are the vast majority of workplaces in Michigan, available right on our website at michigan.gov, COVID workplace safety. I'll touch on in just a second. You can download that. It's going to have all the pieces that you need to be in compliance with those rules. And then for your industry specific pieces, you're going to need to layer those in a little bit. You have to be doing daily health screenings, and you can do this in a few different ways. Some businesses are using paper forms that employees fill out every day. It includes a questionnaire about symptoms. Those symptoms are fever, cough, that kind of stuff. And then some secondary symptoms. It comes right from CDC and DHHS, but we have a wonderful tool I'll mention called the My Symptoms app, which is free for employers to use, that will allow employees to do that daily health screening questionnaire and give employers the results right from their smartphone, tablet, desktop, you name it. You need to be doing those, because the greatest tool you have is to keep that right out of the workplace. When MIOSHA is doing their thing, if you can keep the hazard out of the workplace to begin with, that is the ultimate goal. A lot of times you can't do that, and that's why we have these other mitigation strategies here that you can use. You need to be doing training for your employees, which includes how COVID spreads and things that they need to be doing, cleaning, you name it. Record keeping, those daily health screenings, as well as your training logs and things like that, you need to maintain. You need to just ensure that you're in compliance with the rules, making a good faith effort to comply. One of the things that MIOSHA always looks at is the employer making a good faith effort? And if you are not, if you don't have a plan, it's going to be really hard for you to say you're making a good faith effort. And then we're going to talk more right now about remote work, because we've gotten this question a lot. Certainly you saw it in the DHHS announcement yesterday. There is a rule in our emergency rules regarding remote work. We understand fully that some people cannot work remotely. Certainly production, manufacturing, construction, things that people are doing with their hands. Obviously, remote work is not really an option. It could be in some cases if you want to be creative, and we'd encourage that, but we understand that. But you do have to create a policy that prohibits in-person work to the extent that those activities can feasibly be completed remotely. And of course, the first question that comes to mind for all of you is, what does feasible mean? Well, feasible is going to take into account several considerations, including economics, technical feasibility, things like that. But in the office environment in particular, we just have to avoid that congregation. So MIOSHA accepts a written policy. It can be part of that preparedness and response plan. You don't need to create a separate document that really kind of identifies which employees must be in person and why. And you should note that MIOSHA doesn't have to prove it's possible for you to do that. Employers have to demonstrate that it's infeasible. So you're going to really want to take time to do that analysis, create a thoughtful, reasoned approach to why people need to be in the office. Could be security, could be database stuff. There could be several things that really make it nearly impossible for you to get those people outside of the workplace. But this congregation, especially over these next few weeks, is bad. And we really got to work together to make sure that we're trying to mitigate that as much as we can. So you should include in there at least enough specificity, because MIOSHA is going to ask for this, that shows which positions and classifications you have that are going to report for in-person work and why. And then a few reasons why that can't be performed remotely. And they're going to take a look at that. Now, they're not going to argue with you all day about whether Sean in accounting could be remote or not, depending on your analysis. But if it just says, I just need them here, they're going to have some questions for you, and they're going to want to talk about why you're not trying to get that person out of the office environment. What we're trying to avoid here is congregation on all fronts. So we have case numbers going up in all types of workplaces. I showed you that that includes office environments. Office environments can be attached to other types of industries. So if a lot of manufacturing has a whole lot of production and an office in the front, you need to be thinking about this for that office in the front as well. And critical infrastructure is not a free pass to do whatever you want to do. You still need to be taking these mitigation strategies, creating these plans, and making sure that you are minimizing congregation, especially while we have these huge outbreaks, and implementing these mitigation measures. We have all kinds of materials available. As I mentioned, and you know, I was with you before earlier in the year, maybe once, maybe twice. I don't remember. There's been a lot of these. I apologize if I don't remember them all. But these materials have been there. They're available for you. They are updated. This is where you're going to see anything we do get updated and posted. So it's michigan.gov/COVID workplace safety. We have guidelines for every industry that was named in an executive order, and we've maintained that going forward. And these were all updated immediately to reflect the rules and the things that you need to be doing in accordance with the MIOSHA emergency rules. Great resource for you. I understand when you pull up the rules, you can get lost in there and maybe not understand it all. Definitely grab those guidelines. We created those to make it easier for everybody to understand what the rules say, what you need to be doing. And then we certainly link over to the DHHS stuff. And we continue to have posters. We're updating videos there. We have fact sheets we've created. All of these tools to really help you hone in and understand exactly what we're expecting and things that you can be doing. And one of the things I always like to mention is I understand today we're talking about what you have to do, but think about what you can do. We all see the news. We all see the numbers. We all see the spread. We see the positivity. Take that next step on things that you might be able to do in your workplace. And I understand, and we understand too, that sometimes employees don't really want to wear face coverings, but you're going to need to hammer that home that these things have to happen to really make sure that we can get open and stay open. One of the things that we set up very early in this crisis, wonderful tool, I would encourage you all to take advantage of it, is MIOSHA created a hotline, 855-SAFE-C19, goes directly into MIOSHA. And I've been sharing this all the time. I find it, you know, I say it in a funny way because I think it's awesome. The wait time to get to a MIOSHA expert on this has been about 10 seconds throughout this crisis. Now, you're not going to get that level of service in most places, and they're doing a great job hitting those phones, getting those questions answered. And if you need more help, they can get you over to the consultation team that I'll mention in just a minute. Or if you're an employee, they can get you over to the complaint side if that's something that needs to happen. But this is a great tool. The average call is about 4 to 5 minutes, depending on what your question is. They will work with you through a myriad of questions. Just use it anytime you want to. It's not one and done. So as you're continuing to try to figure out how to mitigate the spread of COVID in your workplaces, things that you can do, use this tool. It's a wonderful tool. 855-SAFE-C19. Wonderful team over there. You get right to the experts and they can help you navigate through the things that you can be doing in your workplace to make it happen. And we have a couple of consultation programs. We've launched a new one we call the Ambassador Program. This is a proactive consultation program. MIOSHA has long had a dedicated consultation, education, and training program, which has included access for employers across Michigan to our consultants. These are not enforcement folks. These are just consultants. They will work with you on your plans, on your workplace. We're certainly doing a lot of this for COVID right now, but they do it all the time for other issues and safety questions that come up in all types of standards, cases, employers, you name it. We've expanded on this to create this ambassador program where these are consultants that are just, we've picked a list of employers that operate in what we call those heightened community transmission risk industries. Those would be where the general public's coming in more. So those would be bars, restaurants, gyms, theaters, you name it. Obviously, yesterday changes that a little bit, but with DHHS, but we're going to continue to do this. These folks would just stop in. They'll run through a checklist with managers or owners if they have time. And if the business has even more time, they will spend a couple, 3 hours doing what we call a tier 2 visit, where they spend some time and really hone in on that plan and help those employers sort out what they need to be doing. Now this team is just picking, we narrowed down a list of those types of employers, and they're just going out and stopping in. We are setting up, and you'll see news this week on how you can request one of those, what we call tier 2, the longer visits in your workplace. We are honing in on this though. So if you're in construction, manufacturing, maybe an office environment that's not really open to the public or something like that, I would encourage you to use the other team, the Consultation, Education, and Training professionals at MIOSHA. Now, there is a tab, if you just Google MIOSHA, right on the left-hand side says Consultation. you can request a consultation right from there. They can do those over the phone or in person, depending on what you need. Obviously, with the volume, we're trying to do more over the phone because we don't have unlimited staff, just like every business in Michigan. But they can come on site if you need that, and they're happy to do it. They've also talked with many employers about what their plans are. They've looked at some plans. They really try to just be helpful in any way that they can to make sure that you have the resources you need to sort of keep it moving forward. Both of these programs are great. If an ambassador just pops in, I would encourage you just to let them in, work with them. If you can't do it right then, schedule a follow-up. These are not citation or enforcement actions. These are just consultants trying to help. And they're not going to send information back over to the enforcement side of MIOSHA unless they show up and you're just absolutely doing nothing. Then you could run into a challenge, but otherwise it's just there for consultation. We have other links on that michigan.gov COVID workplace safety to things that you can use or need. One of these, this long string of letters here, is the Michigan Economic Development Corporation Peer Michigan Business Connect. Those are Michigan manufacturers that are making safety related products. Those could be face coverings, sanitizer, plastic barriers, you name it. I talked with them a while ago now, but those manufacturers did have capacity for products. So if you are still looking for those things in your workplace, check out this link. If you're watching right now and you're an employer doing those things, you can connect your business through this link as well. It's a wonderful tool. And then that My Symptoms app that I mentioned. So you have to be doing those daily health screenings. It must include a questionnaire on symptoms so that we can try to flag and keep COVID right out of our workplaces. DHHS and the University of Michigan created this app. It's free to accomplish this goal, and it does comply with the executive emergency rules. You, as an employer, you'll go and set up an account. You'll get an employer code. You give that to your employees. They'll set up their link back to you using that code. And then you have real-time access to reports on who's taken the questionnaire, who hasn't, who's flagged, who hasn't. The employee will get a notification when they do the questionnaire. It'll either be green on their phone saying they've not flagged, or it'll be orange saying something like, call your supervisor and medical professional because you've identified as possible symptoms of COVID. Now we're in the fall. We know that it's cold and flu season. Just like anywhere, these symptoms are similar. So it's possible that we're going to run into some things where they're flagging for symptoms of COVID, they get tested and it's not. But this tool is there and it's free to use. It'll really help you, and it'll do the record keeping component for you. So I would definitely encourage you to check that out. And then on the Michigan Safe Start site, a lot of good data and information there, as well as what can be open, what can't be open, what state of the plan are we in. And then DHHS has wonderful resources that can help you with the Mask Up Michigan program and making sure that we're really encouraging everybody to wear those face coverings and do things that they can. Now, a couple of side notes I didn't have in my presentation I do want to cover. So we get questions about tests and quarantine and isolation quite often. So you have to really get serious if you're not about quarantining and isolating quickly. Certainly if somebody comes down with symptoms of COVID, we would anticipate that you're going to get them out of the workplace quickly. You're going to need to identify those employees that were in close contact. If you get a confirmed COVID case, you have to call local public health. The reason for that is to track outbreaks as well as help you with the contact tracing components, and they will do that. But keep in mind, that a test does not get you out of quarantine. So if we're in close contact, meaning within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more, and as you know, that's cumulative, and that person is confirmed as positive for COVID, I meet that definition of close contact. Let's say this happens on a Monday, I get tested on Tuesday and it's negative. That does not get me out of that 14-day quarantine. The reason for that is that, as you all know, symptoms can develop, the virus can take hold within that 14-day window. So it's really necessary to make sure that you are following that quarantine. Depending on the type of workplace, I get these questions often. Seems like manufacturing, construction more than manufacturing, really, not fully understanding, at least the people I've talked with, how quickly they need to do these things and how they need to identify those other employees that may have been in close contact. But, I hear from folks too that, went to somebody's house on Saturday. It turns out they had COVID. I took a test, I'm fine. That's not true. That's not true unless you get through that 14-day quarantine period. So with that, as you can tell, I can talk forever, but that was about our first half hour, and I would definitely like to try to get to as many questions as we can for our remaining time. So I will stop there.
Great, thank you, Sean. Lots of good information. And just for all of the attendees, we will be posting the recording, as well as we'd love to get your PowerPoint to share with attendees too. We've gotten a few requests already.
Sure.
So we've got a number of great questions. We'll get to as many as we can. So I will just go ahead and read these in the order that they were received. So first one up, our business is deemed critical infrastructure and our office has stayed open this entire time due to the nature of the work we do. We have a robust COVID policy and are taking all precautions as outlined by MIOSHA. We have limited capacity to work remotely as much of our files are still paper. How do I effectively decide what steps to take at this time?
So first things first there, as I mentioned, critical infrastructure is not a pass. I'm not suggesting that the question is asking for a free pass, so I don't want to sound rude. I'm not intending to be rude, but critical infrastructure is a serious designation. Those are industries, as everybody knows, that support us all in some way or another. And if they were to close, we're going to have some serious problems, right? We're going to lose access to supplies that we need. So we understand those industries. We understand the need for those industries to continue operating. Certainly, that's part of that analysis that you're going to need to do in your remote work policy prohibiting in-person work. And if you have paper files, you have certain things that you do, that's going to be part of your analysis. And MIOSHA, as I mentioned, is not intending to come in and just argue to death with you that, you know, if you installed this $1 million piece of something, you could make this happen. That's not the intent of their analysis. What they're going to look at is that you are making good faith effort, that you're trying to comply, that you are getting as many people out as you can. Because as I mentioned at the outset, and as you know full well, congregation's bad. So one of the things that is going to happen as an employer is you are going to have COVID in your workplace if you're continuing to have in-person work. So you need to prepare for that. You need to understand quarantine and isolation, get as many people out as you can, make sure that you are following all the mitigation strategies and otherwise for sure.
Thank you. Next one. Our veterinarian clinic is only open to curbside service at this time. When working close together, we understand that face shields should be worn. Are masks with safety goggles acceptable? It is very difficult to restrain animals while wearing a face shield.
I think that'd probably be a good question for the 855 Safe C19 without understanding what type of face coverings you're wearing. As the veterinarian knows, and for those that might not know, part of the reason for the face shield is to protect your eyeballs, right? The virus can get into you in a myriad of ways, and that's why hygiene is so important, because if you touch your eyes, nose, or mouth and you're contaminated on your hands, you're potentially contaminating yourself. Those safety shields really help keep out the remainder of the virus. It's in addition to a face covering to really help mitigate that spread. So goggles might work depending on what type you're using. I would mention that CDC has identified a couple of types of masks, specifically those cloth ones that have the little valves that make it easier for you to breathe are not containing the virus, so they do not recommend those. But you'd really want to think through what level of protection that person has. But you could check in with the 855 Safe C19 to have a more detailed conversation.
Great, and that hotline is really a great resource, and it sounds like you get a quick response, so we'll make sure we share that information. Next question is from a school business office. So we are struggling with determining what work can be done remotely in our school business office. We serve 5 local districts, providing all of their business services and staff work with multiple districts related to payroll, accounts receivable, accounts payable, all things COVID, and need access to copiers, files, financial software platforms, and many other things that are not accessible from home. There's also a ton of concern about hackers when working in our firewall, and potential financial concerns also. So if staff are following PPE guidelines and distancing, I want to be able to keep them working in person. We have been doing in-person business office services since COVID started and would like to keep doing the same, but unsure how the MIOSHA rules affect this practice.
Yeah, I think, we understand that a lot of offices, or not a lot, but many offices were continuing to have in-person work. As I showed you earlier, it's not working. That's not working for office spaces. We're continuing to have significant outbreaks there. We've had them higher all summer. Even when other industries opened, offices were running 8 to 10 a week, just right on through. And that's continuing to increase. And as our community spread numbers continue to go up, anywhere we're getting together is going to be bad. So one of the reasons that DHHS is focusing so much on office environments is this seems like a place where we can help get people out of the workplace because their work may not physically require them to be there. And there are alternatives like VPNs, other tools to help with those hacking, that concern about hacking or other things to really help people get in and do their work from a location that's not together. So, you're going to really need to do that detailed analysis. And if there are tools that you can use to get those folks out of there, you should take advantage of them.
Sean, are there any special requirements or guidelines if it's a school? Are some of these things maybe an administration decision?
No, MIOSHA covers all workplaces in Michigan with limited exceptions. Those are mines, domestic service, federal employees, and tribal casinos. Pretty much everything else is covered. So schools are covered by these emergency rules, as well as all the other MIOSHA standards as well.
Thank you. Next question. We've made great efforts and changes to provide a safe office working environment. Now, each employee is in a separate office separated by physical walls. Masks are required as someone comes into the office and anytime they leave their office, including anytime in shared spaces. All employees are screened prior to coming into the office. So, is it really necessary now to set up offices in each employee's home?
So as I mentioned at the outset, about 40% of the spread is asymptomatic folks. So that means those health screenings aren't going to catch these people. They're going to feel fine. They're not going to have a fever. They're going to be in your workplace. So I think that tells you that it will be in your workplace. So creating an environment where these people can be at home is going to help. And then keep in mind that while they're in their office, maybe they're isolating as much as they can, there's still a lot of shared spaces and offices. How are we getting in and out of the building? We're passing each other in hallways. We're in the restroom at the same time. We're grabbing our lunch out of the little break room at the same time. We're going to interact with each other. And anytime we do that, with our case numbers as high as they are, we have a chance to spread the virus to each other.
Thank you. Next question is on screening. Is it required that a workplace screening is conducted prior to entering the facility? So basically getting at whether it's required right now.
Health screening is absolutely required. It must include a questionnaire. And the preference is that you do it before you enter the building, because if it's after you entered the building, you really didn't, what did you really do, right? If that person were to flag for symptoms after they're already indoors, you just probably exposed, many more workers, if not your entire workplace.
And I think, Sean, that's a good question because if memory serves me right, I believe that at a time, for a brief moment, certain industries were not required to screen. And I think that was when we were going through a transition with requirements.
So the only difference this entire time, and that's a good question, Kirsty, and it's not a slam on anybody, but I've talked even in the last 3 weeks with different types of employers, and they didn't know they were supposed to be screening because there was a lot of news about manufacturing doing temperature checks and a couple of industries doing temperature checks. Every industry was supposed to be doing the questionnaire, and it absolutely continues and going to continue for the next several months.
Thank you for that distinction. We appreciate that additional information. So want to know if dance studios fall under the fitness center category.
So, excuse me. So I don't know that one off the top of my head. I think, I don't think I covered it, but I mentioned to Kirsty earlier that, the DHHS order just came out yesterday. We're continuing to review it as well. And certainly, I think Kirsty offered herself up, but email those questions in and we'll have to look to DHHS to get some of that interpretation.
Sure. And is that something you think that the MIOSHA hotline would be able to help with, or is that something we should get in touch with DHHS on?
The MIOSHA hotline would help with the emergency rules, those questions, and I'm going to look through there to, kind of see if we have that answer, at least as a workplace safety perspective. But if it's related to the DHHS order, you should go to DHHS.
Sure. And I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat as well if people would like to follow up with me after. So next question, again, going to face shields. Is a face shield without a mask acceptable in a manufacturing environment?
No, it's 6 feet or less face covering, 3 feet or less face shield. That's in addition to the face covering. Now, having said that, I understand some employers, with employees have to work through an ADA reasonable accommodation for those folks that might be medically unable to tolerate a face covering. That might work, but they cannot create a greater hazard to themselves or to their coworkers. So you really have to think through what that looks like. But no, in general, if you're within that 3 feet space, it's face covering plus face shield.
Thank you. So now we've got a question about that screening. What information should be included in the record of screening?
So what MIOSHA will be looking for there is that you've conducted the screening. I'm going to use my name because I always do that when I'm giving examples. Sean took the screening and he either passed or failed. You do not need to keep what the answers to all of the symptoms were. If you are using the My Symptoms app, it'll do that for you. If you're doing it on paper, you're going to need to keep those. And the emergency rules say for 1 year from the time of generation. Another reason to try to use that free tool, because they'll store that on those servers and all that kind of stuff, and you can access it later if you need it. And there's a reason for that. It's not just because we feel like you need to keep some paper. It's that if MIOSHA were to get a complaint, they have an obligation to investigate. And if an employee were to say, hey, my employer's not doing health screenings, they're going to ask those questions. And that could be a couple months ago, it could be several months ago. And in the worst case, you have a workplace fatality that they have an obligation to investigate. And those can happen several months later, as you know, but MIOSHA has an obligation to go look. And most workplaces probably won't happen because you may not be in a higher risk category or something like that. But MIOSHA has been investigating some medical worker fatalities, some police officer fatalities, and other things. And they have an obligation to do that. And you're going to want to be able to have those records. Otherwise, it's very difficult to say, yes, we were doing them, Sean was fine on that day, etc.
Thank you for that. So this is a great question, and it sounds like you've got some wonderful resources through MIOSHA to help support workplaces. But this question asks what the effective date on remote work is. Because they'll need a little time to get into compliance. So this is something that's been present in the previous order. And so just want to know what tools are available for businesses to get into compliance and help them move their workforce remote.
Sure. First and foremost, as I mentioned, good faith effort. So if you're doing that analysis, we're really highlighting this now, so more employers are becoming aware of it. We understand that. The executive order previously pushed remote work. We understand that. In your region in particular, you didn't have to, right? It said should. It didn't say must for remote work because you guys were in phase 5. Now we're moving into a different part of this COVID crisis where the numbers everywhere are just way too high, way beyond containing it right now, and we got to bring those down together. So making that good faith effort, doing the analysis, moving forward towards it. MIOSHA's goal is to educate before they regulate. So certainly call the hotline and talk with them about the pieces that you need to have in place. If you're making the move forward, you're going to be fine. If you've done the analysis and you've identified that it's impossible to move these people out of here, you're going to be fine. But if you say, like, I just like my team around, that's where you're going to have some challenges.
Thank you for that. Next, we've got a business that is a vetted PPE supplier, and they would like to know how they can be included on the vendor list that was mentioned.
Sure. So the link that I shared at the Michigan, so if you go to our COVID workplace safety site, you scroll down toward the bottom, there's a link over to the Michigan Economic Development Corporation's Pure Michigan Business Connect platform. Wonderful string. If you see half the alphabet there, that's probably the right link. Just click on that. You can sign up to be a vendor there as well. So if you're looking for stuff, you can find it there. If you want to be a vendor there, you can sign up there as well. And I appreciate that. Good. I appreciate that for sure.
Absolutely. So next, a lot of talk about remote work. So are there different guidelines for independent contractors? Are they able to work in person?
So independent contractors, depending on how you're structured, you are more than likely an employee in some sort. Sometimes you are not. And MIOSHA's statute applies to employees. But if you're doing in-person work, you're going to need to comply with those rules. If you are an independent contractor reporting for some business that's hired you to do whatever it is you do as an independent contractor, they are going to need to comply with those rules as well, which will affect how they treat you. So definitely make sure that you're following these rules and understanding them. And keep in mind what I mentioned at the outset is that it's distance, masks, hygiene, distance, mask, hygiene. All of these rules are designed to do that. So I know that a lot of us need to do in-person work, or we want to do in-person work, but especially while our numbers are really high, our positivity rate's really high, just do that next step for all of us. Because when we want to get open and stay open, the way that we do that is keeping our numbers down.
Absolutely. So next question, going back to screening. Will a failed screening count as a record, or do we need to keep the past screenings also, past screenings?
You should keep any record for 1 year from the time of generation. So if I pass, and then the next day I failed, you should keep those pass up to that 1 year.
Great, and we've got a number of questions. We've got about 15 minutes left, so Sean, we'll keep going through these as quick as we can. So next question, can it be a part of the office plan to rotate personnel so there are no more than one person at the office to take care of necessary work at a time?
Absolutely, and kudos, I would encourage it for sure.
Wonderful. We have some one-person offices. Any problem with office work if there is no visitors?
No, that should be fine. I think, we understand that. We all understand that. And even in the state of Michigan, a huge employer, right? We got about 90% or so working remote. There are some jobs that just can't do that. And part of that is keeping your business open, getting mail, depending on what you do, it's possible somebody needs to be there. But those concepts like, I'm going to rotate people, I'm going to have them just come in for 1 day to pick up work and take it home. You can do all of those things, and that'll fit with a good plan, a good, strong plan.
Next question, are you able to offer any information about restaurants and bars using heated tents and heated covered patios?
Yes, a little bit. So I've talked with the state fire marshal several months ago. He joined us on some webinars we did. I think we did one in Northern Michigan area as well. Just a couple of points that those things can become structures. If you're heating them, there are some fire code things that you need to do. So definitely call your local fire department and talk with them about how that's going to be structured. Depending on the type of heat source, if you're using propane, of course, you could create carbon monoxide. So you definitely want to, make sure that you're covered with the fire code on how you handle that. There could be lighting and some other things that you need to do. What we know is that, and we did an HVAC webinar. If you go to our Michigan Leo YouTube page, we have this wonderful webinar we did with ASHRAE, who are the experts on all this, to talk about ventilation and other things. And as it gets colder, humidity goes down. That can help that virus carry further. So indoor environments, you want to think about a few things that you might want to change there. There are no requirements to do that. Oh, excuse me, but definitely take a look at them. But certainly, tents and closures, we understand that. Just check with your local fire department, your local building department, and that kind of stuff on what those things mean.
Excellent, thank you. So the next few questions are about screening. Seems to be a lot of need for information around that. So first question is, if you're able to store the questionnaire information, the responses, digitally?
Yes.
Wonderful. Next question. Do you still need to require staff to do health screenings when your office is closed to the public and staff are working remote? So if staff are at home, nope.
No,
okay.
No, you do not. But if you have field folks, so state of Michigan as an example again, MIOSHA folks are field folks, right? So if they're going into the field for some reason, they have to go visit whatever it is. I'm thinking like a construction contractor right now, right? Doing service work or somewhere. That employee will need to do a health screening before they take off to go wherever it is that they need to go.
Great. Next question. So when people are working remotely from home, are they obligated to stay home during work time? And how do I know that they are following safety rules on their own time?
Yes, certainly. So depending on how you structure your work, I can't tell you how to structure your work. So if you, uh, if they normally clock in between 8 to 5 with that hour lunch, like a lot of people do or something like that, certainly as an employer, you have some control over what's happening during the day. Obviously, after hours, employees can do what they need to do. And we just help that you promote the philosophy that to get open and stay open, to keep people working, to keep businesses doing business, we really have to all stick together to get these numbers in a range that's community spread is going away.
Wonderful, thank you. So the next question is, so if you do have an employee and they have had contact or they have to answer yes to one of the screening questions and they have to stay home, does it change if they seek medical attention? Can they come back to work?
So I'm going to say in general, no. If they are showing symptoms of COVID, they're going to have to, work with their doctor, probably get tested, and it's possible they come back negative. Now, if you're showing symptoms of something and you come back negative for COVID, more than likely you don't have COVID. Now, you'll have to make a determination if you really want the flu or the cold back in your workplace anyway, but it's possible that they could come back. Now, if they've just been exposed and they're not showing any symptoms, they're going to have to do that 14-day quarantine. If they are confirmed for COVID with those symptoms, then it's a 10-day and a couple of other parameters that their fever's gone without medication. If they had one, their symptoms are going away without medication and things like that before they can return to the workplace.
Thank you. Another question. So are we required to have documentation of the daily screenings? We currently conduct verbal screening with a touchless thermometer and only document failed screenings. So they'd like to know if they need to keep record of folks who passed the screening.
Yes, they should. And that's all they need to write down. If they're doing it, if they're asking those questions, all they need to do is, Sean, check, but you got your little spreadsheet with the checkbox, check, Sean's good.
Excellent. So another question. So if there are spaces in an office where only one person can go, for instance, this question is asking about like the restroom, do masks need to be worn in spaces where you only have one employee?
Understanding, so the question is like, we have a one stall, one
Right.
person at a time type restroom. I would probably say, obviously you're not going to go in the restroom, make sure somebody's wearing their mask, but I would tell them that anytime you're leaving this office, this cubicle where maybe you don't need one, just wear it. Because as soon as you open that door, there might be somebody standing there, right? So
Right.
you're definitely going to want to be on, always defer to the side of wearing the face cover.
Excellent. So just a note to the attendees, we've got just a couple questions left and we've got, a little over 5 minutes. So if you do have any questions, this is the last call to go ahead and put those in the Q&A feature. If you've got any questions that you think of after the webinar, you're welcome to go ahead and send them to my email or go ahead and give that MIOSHA hotline a call and get an answer quickly. So Sean, don't know if you're able to speak to any of the crowd sizes. So we talked about those outdoor tents for bars and restaurants. What does that look like for gatherings under the tent at this time? Is that something that you're still working through?
Yeah, we're still looking at it. I think everybody's looking at it, right? So we all got the news and the order last night. I think that you can certainly in certain outdoor spaces have people come to a restaurant still, 6 per table, I believe, and keeping them 6 feet apart and those types of things, wearing face coverings until they're seated and eating. I would encourage your customers. I know that it's hard for businesses with customers sometimes, but anywhere. So if you think of an environment where you're going to go in, you're going to possibly be with somebody from a different household. And the reason for that is that if we're spreading COVID, we're keeping it in our household. You're going to meet with somebody from a different household, take off your face covering and be close together for an hour or more. Those are areas where we really want to be cautious, right? So encouraging them to keep that face covering on until they're actually eating. I know that many people have gone to a restaurant and everybody goes in, sits down, and is back to normal for that hour and a half, and we need to be just on our guard. So we're going to continue to evaluate that order as well and see if we can help understand some of those pieces the best that we can. But as Kirsty said, send those questions in and we'll see what we can do.
Next question we have is, if an employee needs to be quarantined and they're hourly employees, is there a way for them to be compensated?
So they will qualify for Michigan unemployment. You can file an employer filed claim to help them collect that unemployment. I think that DHHS is working with the unemployment agency to make it easier for those folks to qualify. Depending on whether or not you're covered by the paid sick leave under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, you may need to pay those folks for 80 hours. So that's definitely something you want to check into. As an employer, you can qualify for tax credits to offset those costs. So it's not just all on you. You can check that out right through the IRS. So those are a couple of different pieces. And depending on what they do, if they're quarantined and they can work remotely, they can still work. They just need to be quarantined from everybody else. And that's true if somebody is working remotely and they do have COVID. If their symptoms aren't that bad and they feel like they can keep on working, you can work with them to do that. You don't have to force them to just lay on the couch, so to speak, at home. You can navigate through some of those things.
Thank you, Sean. I want to just make clear for all of our attendees on the webinar right now, when it comes to bars and restaurants, I just wanted to pull up the most recent order that just came out yesterday that everyone's still looking at. Again, this order goes into effect Wednesday, and it says gatherings are permitted at food service establishments under the following conditions. And those conditions are: persons are not gathered indoors except in custodial settings, medical facilities, school and university cafeterias, shelters, and soup kitchens. If attendees are seated at tables, persons must be 6 feet apart, or members of a household may share a table, and tables must be spaced at a minimum 6 feet apart. And persons participating in outdoor dining are seated no more than 6 to a table, and tables are spaced at a minimum of 6 feet apart. So again, will going into effect on Wednesday. No indoor dining for bars and restaurants. Just want to make that very clear for our attendees, and Travelers Connect and the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance are happy to help navigate any of those questions too. Okay, and it looks like we had one last question come in. Can unemployment be filed if employees exhaust their EPSLA?
So I would encourage them to file a claim, as we know that I think the question is about the extension to 39 weeks and things like that. It can become more challenging for certain folks if they've been off that long, but I'd encourage them to file. And, we're continuing, as the governor said yesterday, continuing to really push for some type of stimulus to help both small businesses and employees. This is one of the hardest things we have, is that we need employees to stay home. If they're sick or if they are exposed, we know that, working people have to work, and unemployment at $362 a week, if you max out, doesn't really cover everything, and they're going to try to come to work. And we also need businesses to be able to work with less, and both of those things are going to require some support from the federal government to really make sure that we have the financial resources to continue to support all of the things that you're trying to do as businesses, and all the things that working people need to do to really help us contain COVID.
It looks like there were two questions. So does EPSLA cover temporary employees that regularly work at an organization 15 to 20 hours per week?
So there are some different rules. I don't want to get too deep into unemployment because I don't want to lead you astray, but there are different rules for part-time workers. Temporary employees can be covered by unemployment. EPSLA may cover them in a couple of different capacities. So those are definitely things that we'd want to dig into deeper. I can certainly help you get questions over to the unemployment agency for answering. And if we get deep into unemployment questions, could also help coordinate somebody specifically from unemployment to come over and work with you all if you have those needs.
And Sean, this is the final question that we'll take right now. This person said, if I could confirm that there is no indoor dining in bars and restaurants beginning Wednesday. And I was referencing the order that came out yesterday. There's an infographic that was released with that order, and it does go in effect Wednesday, and indoor dining for restaurants and bars is included in that 3-week pause. So our Traverse Connect and the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance will be sharing more information on that later as well. Great. Well, thank you, Sean, so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time and answering. It looks like we got through nearly 30 questions. So thank you for your time. We appreciate it. And thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Take care.